To make the walls for the mummies in a classroom full of 35 kids, it's great to have a tool to help with the job, and so I'm going to use an extruder. And this is the die that goes in the extruder. It's got an opening that is 1 3/4 inches tall, and it's rectangular in shape. And I'm going to set this up in the extruder and begin to extrude some side walls. And so this is an extruded side wall that we're going to use and attach to the mummy base. When you go to make the bottom of the mummy, you have to do the same process that you did at the beginning of the mummy, and this is, you have to make a slab of clay. So put the sticks next to your clay, use the rolling pin, then take the cardboard tracer and trim around with your pin tool. And your goal here is to just end up with a nice flat slab that is the exact same shape as the top of your mummy. You can take this extra clay and put it back into the clay bag at this point. This part of the project is all about joining the walls, and so scoring is really important at this part of the project. I have a little poem that I teach the kids about scoring, and it's, "Scoring is boring, but I make lots of lines. Slipping is dipping, I like it just fine. Smoothing is soothing, it relaxes my mind." And I tell the kids they can relax if they've done these 3 steps, because their clay project will stay together. So after we've got the bottom scored, then we need to score the side wall. And so notice that I'm kind of just gesturing with my hand, kind of scoring it in a movement that I think of as an away movement. I'm kind of just stroking away, pulling away from my wrist, and that lets me score really quickly. So instead of trying to make each line one at a time, I can score really quickly just by the way I move my wrist. Once you've got all the scoring done, then you're going to add some water to the wall of the mummy. Paintbrush works great for this. You're also going to add water to the bottom slab. Now in our art room we like to work with dog bowls as water bowls because they have a very low center of gravity and we get a lot less spills that way. So just by buying 8 brand new dog bowls, we use these for the water bowls on our tables. When you go to put this sidewall slab on here, it's very nice to work your way around the whole mummy, and you want to make sure that the parts that get joined together, where the wall meets itself, is on the side of the mummy. And you'll see why near the end of this project. The worst place for these 2 walls to meet would be at the bottom of the mummy, because we're going to cut a cork there, and we want that cork to be one solid piece. So having it join on the side is just a really good place for it to join. And so you score both of those edges where the walls meet, a little bit of water, push those together, and then go around your mummy. This is an easy time to make sure that the bottom wall, or the bottom slab, is lined up with the side walls. And so you've got access to the inside and the outside, so spend a little time making sure that your side walls are right on top of your slab, and follow the contour of your mummy exactly. One of the mistakes kids make is that they will sometimes want to put the side wall around the slab. So encourage them to put that on top of the slab so that the mummy bottom and the mummy top line up together. The next thing that you have to do on this to get the mummy top attached is you've got to score around the top edge of the wall. So go around the entire thing with your pin tool using that flicking motion so you can make these rather quickly. The next thing that we'll need to do is get the top, which we stored in a Ziploc bag, and we put that with a name and class code paper in the bag so that on the day that the kids return to class we can get these out rather quickly instead of trying to figure out who made which mummy just by how they look. It's important to support the mummy with the full length of your hand and wrist when you pull this out of the bag, because you don't want the slab to flop around and crack. And if you bend this slab too many times, the place where it usually wants to crack is right below the arms or right below the head. So as you can see, I'm supporting it fully right up my arm, right up the wrist, and using that same rapid scoring motion I go around the perimeter of the whole top. Then to speed things up when it comes to adding water, a paintbrush works great here. Go around the entire surface of the top edge, and then do the same thing for the top of the wall. As you get this thing flipped over, it's important to align the walls with the top edge, and that's what you see me doing here. I'm going around, aligning the edges. What you want to do next is take your finger and smooth across the seam. You want to move clay across it so that it gets joined. Kids want to go this way, but that doesn't move enough clay across the seam. So after I have the kids move the clay with their finger, we use a little serrated tool, a little plastic tool that we have in the art room. And this is great for getting the kids to move the side wall and the bottom and top slabs across that line. That's the number one place that these mummies will go wrong, is that they'll crack along that seam. And so by having the kids sew across it, I tell them that sewing two pieces of fabric together, the thread acts to connect them, and when they're moving their fingers across these clay slabs, they're sewing across the seam so that the seam is held together. And so as we're moving the clay across the seam, what we're doing is we're making it into one solid piece. This place right here, underneath the headdress, is where a lot of kids forget to do the moving and the scoring and the getting this thing all put together. And so what happens in their case is that they'll get a crack up here, which can then spread all along the side. So I tell the kids, make sure you work off the edge of your table so that as you're working, you can get your hand into all the areas. It also brings you down to eye level with the mummy while you're working at it. If the wall's in too far, you can just reach in there with that tool and pull it out so that it's aligned with the top, and then start that same process again, sewing these slabs together by moving clay across the seam. This moving across the seam is what's going to hold the whole mummy together. And so the kids are so excited at this point that a lot of times they're just dying to get it done, and they want to go quickly. But I make sure that I inspect all of the mummies, and if they don't have this done, then I give them back to them and tell them that they really need to go back and do this, because after all the work that goes into these things, you don't want to have them not turn out in the firing. The other thing about the little texture on the side is that our glazes look great over the top of that, so we just leave the serrated texture in from that tool because our glazes break nicely over the edges of that. This is where the cork is going to go in the mummy, and so this is where you want to spend a lot of time smoothing this together, because in a couple hours when this piece is leather hard, what I do is I take an X-Acto knife and I'll cut a cork in here. So we want to make sure that we've got that nice and smooth. Once the mummy's totally done, we flip it over and the kids write their name on it with a pencil. And so that's what you see me doing here. I also instruct them that they can write the date. And so I'm just putting the year, but the kids will sometimes write the day that they finished it. Another thing that they'll write is their class code, because I'll teach 4 or 5 classes at a time. And sometimes they'll write a saying that they might have that they always say to their friends. Kind of another way to get an artifact in. Here I'm just making a few little details. I'm putting a little spiral on the top of the head. I've had kids make little cobras before. I had one girl make a dozen roses for the hands. Sometimes they want to add the little beard. This is the time to do that. After the mummies have sat around in my art room for 2 to 3 hours, they start to become leather hard. And it's at this point that you can take an X-Acto knife and you can slice in to the clay at an angle. And I think of this as similar to the way that you might slice a pumpkin top, coming at it from an angle so that when this cork goes back into the mummy, it won't fall all the way into the opening. So the angles on this cork are beveled, and they can slide right back in to the opening. And to let these dry, I just set them gently on top of the mummy.